Minister Dame Harriett Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Ms Cummings. And yesterday we discussed our amendments which were about trying to rein in some of the unfettered powers that the Secretary of State is taking for himself in this legislation. And today's amendments that we're about to discuss are about trying to rein in the unfettered liability and financial risk that this legislation puts on the taxpayer. So, for example, Madam Chair, Amendment 20 would allow the Secretary of State to provide financial assistance if the National Audit Office has concluded that it would secure value for money for taxpayers. This amendment is obviously about making clear that these powers aren't a blank cheque, that they must be constrained, they must be justified, and they must be used only when strictly necessary. We can't have industrial improvisation when the British taxpayer is being asked to pick up the bill. It's not fair that hard-working taxpayers should be forced to pay for what is likely to be a potential failure of ministers who think they're able to defy the realities of this market. Amendment 22 would cap the amount of financial assistance that could be provided to a steel undertaking to £1 million per worker over a 5-year period. It also fixes the employee count at the point support begins, with employee being defined by Section 230 of the Employment Rights Act 1996. And this amendment ensures that financial assistance is targeted, proportionate, and provides value for money. If the government believe in this intervention, as they clearly do, they should be willing to set limits on it, because without a cap like this, we're simply asking taxpayers to sign up to an unlimited liability. I will give way. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the Shadow Minister consider that putting a limit on this, when the financial support would only be provided in a situation which would be an emergency or seen as absolutely necessary, that this might be unwise in such a situation, and it might lead us to having to recall Parliament yet again in order to take the necessary action?
Well, I actually take issue with where she's coming from on this, because I do think that by putting a very sensible and finite limit on the amount per employee, and I'll come on to another amendment where we put a limit overall, we're talking about the amount that has been set by the Chancellor in terms of the spending review envelope. And I don't think she really wants to be saying to the House that there should be completely unlimited budgets for this intervention. I think she herself would know that in any intervention you ought to go in with a wise idea about what you think is a reasonable limit in terms of spending. And Amendments 10 and 11 increase the frequency with which Parliament is actually told about the amount that's been spent. So currently, as it's framed in the legislation, the Secretary of State must make a report to Parliament only every 12 months. We're suggesting in these amendments that reports about financial assistance should come every 3 months, because we're talking about substantial and significant sums of public money. And we don't think that annual reporting on this is going to be sufficient. We think that quarterly reporting ensures that Parliament can properly scrutinise how much money is being spent and how much is being done in more like real time. And it is essential that financial exposures are monitored closely and transparency. We don't want costs to escalate without people being able to notice them. And we want the ministers to remain accountable for the public spending. New Clause 12 places a firm...
Briefly give way.
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. She and I have both been ministers. We both know that a written ministerial statement is not a complicated thing to do every 3 months or every 4 months or whatever. Would she not agree with me that I struggle to see what reason there could be not to give Parliament that transparency for the simple sake of a piece of paper table once every 3 months, just to ensure taxpayers' interests are protected?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right on this, and I know the Minister to be an extremely reasonable man, so I'm sure he will agree with our amendment this afternoon. New Clause 12 places a firm cap overall on the total financial assistance under this Act. We limit it in this amendment to £2.5 billion. I'm sure the Honourable Lady and other colleagues know that this is the limit that's been set in the steel strategy. So to reach this limit would mean that this intervention has used up the entire amount allocated to the overall steel strategy. And the limit is set up to a specific date in 2029. And as our explanatory statement makes clear, the purpose is simple: to limit the total financial exposure of this bill. At the moment, the way it's phrased is it is a complete open-ended financial commitment. So we think a cap of this nature, which would ensure that ministers must prioritise their spending decisions rather than continuing to inject funds without clear limits or outcomes, seems a very sensible thing to do, and I would urge everyone to support it later on. New Clause 7 would require the Secretary of State to publish a full impact assessment before exercising any power under the Act, rather than after the fact, or indeed not at all. We think that before ministers exercise the sweeping powers in this bill, with potentially billions of pounds at stake, the least the House should expect is a clear, published impact assessment, because good policy begins with good evidence. This is not about slowing down necessary action. It's about making sure that decisions of this scale are taken on the basis of evidence, not urgency or political pressure. An impact assessment would set out the financial costs, the economic implications and the potential risks, ensuring Parliament and the public understand the full consequences of the intervention. New Clause 9 places a clear duty on the Secretary of State to actively seek a private sector purchaser for any nationalised steel undertaking and to report to Parliament every 6 months on the progress made. The Minister has said at the dispatch box that he himself sees this as a potential route to a new private sector investor potentially co-investing alongside the government. But at the moment, this bill lacks any credible exit plan. So this amendment ensures that ministers must actively work towards returning the business to private ownership. I give way.
Grateful to her for giving way on that point, and she's making a very important and interesting point. Now, we've seen in the steel industry over recent years foreign companies coming in, buying British firms, closing them down and leaving us without this capability. Does she propose anything within this amendment that she's now talking about that will prevent that happening again? Is there anything that's going to stop her having forced the government to seek this buyer, to stop that buyer just coming in, closing it down, and we lose that sovereign capability?
Well, of course, what we're looking at here is something which, in the impact assessment, the government says might actually put a bit of a chilling impact on inward investment into the sector. Those are the words of the government's own impact assessment. I think we should all want to have inward investment into our economy. And I think if someone who we regard as an excellent owner of this business should come in and make an offer that is attractive to the government, I absolutely think that that should be something that the government prepares to take seriously. And what we're saying here is that we don't want this to be a permanent state of affairs. We do want this to be a journey to a thriving steel sector, and that may well involve investors coming in from overseas.
I think she's in the same place as the government in saying they want to see an excellent private sector partner in due course at the earliest opportunity. But the point I was trying to make was she's compelling the government in this amendment to seek this provider, and we've seen what happens sometimes previously. So is she saying that ultimately whatever the market decides is what we must do, or is she basically supporting the government in saying this sovereign capability must remain in the UK? Yes, we will work with other partners, but they will not be able to shut down British steelmaking as they have done in the past. Will there be any provisos within the amendment that she suggests?
Yeah, I think he's somewhat conflating two issues. And last year, when the emergency legislation came in, we did not stand in its way, which was something that we were recalled as for the first time on a Saturday since the Falklands War to do. What we're asking here is to keep Parliament informed. Let's agree that we do all want to be kept informed of how these discussions are going, and I will give way in a moment, and to find out what the government is thinking in terms of its exit plan. A point I made yesterday about the public interest test is that it's going to be very unclear how, once the Secretary of State determines that it is in the public interest for this particular site to be owned by the taxpayer, whether there's ever any potential for that to change to be a different state. But I give way to the...
I'm most grateful to the Shadow Minister for giving way. She seems to be inferring that essentially the business should be up for sale at any moment, almost at any price. It's incredibly destabilising for any business and their employees to suffer that uncertainty. What's required is a period of stability, a period of investment with a strong vision. And previously, she made comments about relying on auditors at the National Audit Office making the strategic judgment about what's in the sovereign national interest. With the greatest of respect to auditors, it's actually experienced business people who understand the industry, including the Minister at the dispatch box, who can make a much stronger judgment about what is required in order to retain primary steelmaking in this country with that sovereign capability than a bunch of auditors.
Well, I actually think that the Honourable Gentleman is also agreeing with me here, and I yield to no one in my admiration for the Minister at the dispatch box as well in terms of his expertise in this industry. But I think what I heard the Honourable Member say was that he too thinks that it's going to take some sort of some business investment into this business to bring it back to a state where it is making money. And I think that what I heard him say as well was that therefore he wouldn't object to hearing a report to Parliament every 6 months about the progress being made. So I look forward to him supporting this one as well in the lobby later, because I think that we do want to have our ministers actively working towards returning the business to private ownership. And I think we want to hear in Parliament about the ongoing progress and hold them accountable and be able to ask them questions from time to time on exactly that. Turning to new clause 10, Madam Chair, it requires the Secretary of State to report to Parliament every 6 months on the impact that nationalising steel undertakings has had on inward investment into the UK. I mentioned earlier that the government's own impact assessment worries about the potential for a chilling effect where a government is taking the assets into public ownership in the way that this bill allows. And the UK has very much relied over our history on being seen as a stable and predictable environment for inward investment. Expropriating and nationalising private businesses does set a precedent that could deter future investors, not just in the steel sector but across the wider economy. So this amendment ensures that Parliament receives regular, transparent analysis of how these interventions affect investor confidence and capital flows into the UK economy, something that we all hope will not be adversely affected, but we would want Parliament to know. And so we want this amendment to ensure that any damage to our reputation is identified, understood and addressed early. New clause 11 would prevent the Secretary of State from using the powers under this Act to grant selective advantages through state resources that could distort competition. This amendment ensures that nationalised steel undertakings are not unfairly advantaged over privately owned ones. Without this safeguard, there's real risk that nationalised entities could receive preferential treatment, whether through subsidies, contracts or regulatory advantage, undermining fair competition within the domestic steel sector. If private firms believe they will be placed at a disadvantage compared to state-owned competitors, it risks deterring further investment in UK steel and related supply chains. So to conclude, Madam Chair, taken together, these amendments are about bringing discipline, transparency and balance to a bill that, as drafted, risks being too broad, too costly and too unconstrained. The amendments ensure that any intervention is properly assessed, carefully limited and consistently scrutinised, while protecting taxpayers, competition and investor confidence. If the government is serious about supporting the steel industry, it should also be serious about accountability, value for money and a credible long-term plan, and these amendments are designed to deliver exactly that.